Hi, friends. It's Heidi M, and I'm virtually joined this time with by filmmaker Aaron Poole. Aaron, so nice to see you again.
Great to see you, Heidi.
So Aaron and I have a bit of a history. We met, ironically, in Utah for Slam Dance in the before times for your short film, right? In the before.
Yeah.
So oddly enough, we're in the same city, but this is how we connect these days to make things a little bit more accessible for folks. So Aaron, for people who might not be familiar with your work and your career, can you maybe tell us a little bit about your work in film? And you wear different hats, so I just want people to know that.
Okay. Yeah. My name's Aaron Poole. I mostly wear the hat of an actor. I've been doing that since I graduated theater school in 1999. And mostly living in Toronto. I've had to do all kinds of, TV and films. And I think the things that I'm mostly known for as an actor happen to be horror films, like The Void and The Empty Man and The Conspiracy. I found myself wanting more out of my creative life. And so in 2019, made the short film Oracle, where we met. I was at TIFF and Slam Dance, a number of other festivals. And then when COVID came, I started to create my first feature, DADA, which is premiering at the Future of Film Showcase in June.
Mhm. So, what was the journey like in terms of the pandemic forcing us to sort of be introspective, a little bit more introverted, and getting you to start thinking about data as a feature film? Or did you already know that you were going to make a feature film even before that?
Before I made Oracle, I knew that I was going to make a feature. I knew generally what it was about. I had this script or a permutation of the script. I felt ready, and had I received the financing, I would have made a version of it confidently, but I don't know how competently. And so I found that the pandemic allowed me, as you say, the time for introspection. I was able to shot list the entire thing all the way through 3 times, really figuring out what the emotional and psychological grammar was of each frame, really honing and simplifying and discovering that movement for the sake of movement and coverage for the sake of coverage wasn't something that was sitting well with the story. That the story, being centered around a father and a daughter and their experience of being in sort of a new part of what they perceive as wilderness, had a lot to do with expectation and projection and the fulfillment of those things or the disappointment of those things. And so there was something about the time to shot list that helped me discover that the audience's experience of sitting in front of a screen and expecting a story also has a lot to do with projections, well, literally, digitally, with light. But psychologically and culturally, there's a lot that we bring as audience members to the experience. And I mean, obviously, we speak about it glibly as like cliche or story trope, things like that.
Right.
But there was something more fundamental, like the embodied experience of putting our butt in a seat, staring at a wall, and spending at least an hour and a half to do that, that I wanted to examine with this film. And I felt empowered to do so. I wanted to really like indulge the process.
Right.
And so I'm lucky that I made those discoveries during the pandemic, and sort of honed my shots so that it matched the themes and the content of the story.
I'm curious to go into some of these details in a bit, but just for anyone who's going to tune in, the premise of the film is sort of around a road trip where we meet a father and a daughter, and I think she's turning 16. So that's sort of what takes us on this journey. and we're going to uncover some things, and we're going to feel a lot of different things, and we're going to think a lot of different things. So I just want to put that out there. I don't want to say anymore because I think it's a film that needs to be seen with others, even though I have seen it on my own. But I definitely am curious to see how we in a communal experience react to the film, as you mentioned, because we have expectations, we have biases that we bring with us, and when those expectations are not met, right, that's where it gets really interesting.
I agree, both narratively and in our audience participation. What satisfies the cliche? What do we expect of a dad and a daughter on a road trip? I mean, certainly images of like a road trip film within North America, we think of sort of Sundance and Little Miss Sunshine, and certainly Canada has struggled and to try to, fulfill those cliches again and again and again. And we always tend to sort of in the history of Canadian English cinema to tell stories about the land. And I think I'm really interested in acknowledging some of those expectations and playing with how they are either fulfilled or disappointed.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the land. The film was filmed on Manitoulin Island,
Mm-hmm.
which looks like a beautiful place to be. Why Manitoulin Island?
Kind of a long and interesting story. I'll think about the short version. I wanted the film is set on Lake Huron, further south, and the geologic nature of that area is a specific kind of limestone that was made on an ancient coral reef when there was an inland sea, sort of in prehistoric times, that cut the center of the continent. And when I was unable to shoot in the exact location where it was set because of various complications, political and financial,
yes,
I found a geologic survey online of where that limestone reef continued. And I saw that it went up, skipped over the Bruce Peninsula onto Manitoulin Island, and we started to explore the possibility of shooting there. I learned that the Wingshot Film Institute has an established infrastructure on the island, and so the various population of the island are used to seeing people run around with cameras.
right.
I knew that our crew would be a little bit bigger, and so we had to explore whether there was the places for them to stay and live while they helped make the film. And yeah, upon discovering that the tourist season would be quiet at that time, we were able to find cabins and homes for people to stay in, and it just worked beautifully. Lots of community cooperation. We met some great people, started some great friendships with the locals. It was special. It was a very, very special time for us to be there. We shot for a month, prepped for a month, and I mean, it's like no other place I've been in the world.
I mean, it certainly cuts across that way, that's for sure. So you have this idea of the film that you want to create, and you have to think of a cast, because it's a cast of, I mean, there are supporting actors, yes, there's supporting characters here and there, but it's primarily the dad and the daughter. Can we talk about your casting? You have Ciara Alexys and James Gilbert.
So James Gilbert, or Jim, is a good friend of mine. I made The Conspiracy with him. We first met on that film by Chris McBride, I think over a decade ago now. And I mean, I love Jim's performance, and because of the budget level and because it's sort of an artist-driven project, there was no pressure to have big stars or C-level CW actors, to tell a film. There was a lot of freedom that we had, and I knew that Jim loved the material. I trusted him with sort of the core themes. And so then I could turn my attention to finding the right performer and the right kind of performer for the role of the daughter. And Jesse Griffith's casting really helped. During COVID, of course, we're receiving tapes, and so I'm watching like 50 tapes. Jesse probably watched over 100 submissions, and there were so many good actors for the role that all brought sort of different tones and textures. The one thing in common that I found was that there was a pretty high level of experience. And there was something about casting an experienced actor in that role that just started to make it feel inauthentic. Like it's not like I'm making sort of a kitchen sink drama and naturalism here. Like I really do push performance style into absurdity and things like that, and like a manic social performance between the dad and the daughter.
Right.
But I knew that if we didn't connect to the basic humanity and the somehow like raw experience of being 15 turning 16, that it would be lost. So Ciara Alexys, though she's got like some good voice experience and she's got experience being on set, and she comes from a family of performers, she herself had never played a lead role before, and she just dropped in perfectly. And I'm really, really, really happy with the dynamic between the two, James and Ciara.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what was that discussion you had? I mean, with Jim, you had that established relationship, so I can understand how he would have known about the project and the evolution of it. But once you had Ciara as Kia, the daughter, or Kaya, I think.
Yeah.
So, what was that discussion like in terms of getting her to understand some of the nuances in the story and keeping it raw, as you mentioned, with the emotional components?
I mean, I definitely had to, upon casting them, direct them differently. James has, technical training. We could speak about sort of the shot size and the lenses and kind of like academically at times. But with Ciara, the approach was much more intuitive. It was a lot of sort of parallels in her life. Her mother, because of her age at the time, was on set with us and really gave us permission to create sort of a safe creative bubble to discuss the content. And because we budgeted the film to allow us 23 or 24 shoot days, we had the time to really explore every scene and to do multiple takes and different ways, different approaches.
So, I like that I was able to read your director's statement because it gets my brain going and I'm thinking about different things. So you talk about dealing with tension inside the story and outside the story, right? And I'm wondering, this is just me thinking out loud now, if there's a reason for the title of the film, if there's a play on words here, and where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, so DADA, the obvious sort of diminutive reference to a father, but also the art movement in the early part of the 20th century that was a reaction to the sort of industrialization, the globalization, and the violence that these artists sensed was rising in the world, was a movement that embraced absurdity, that struck out against the kind of commodifying of art, the deference to the classics, and structure itself. They almost saw that as being subservient to this globalized capital system, and they were like the original punk rockers.
Right.
And there was an anger and a violence, and in reaction to the sorrow and the fear that they were experiencing, and I think that we're in a time where everyone senses that something's wrong. And it's been wrong for a long time. And obviously during the pandemic, there was an emergence of some social change that obviously had been brewing in different ways and manifested in different ways. But the Western reckoning of those things is continuing. And we're seeing the fraying of the edges of the kind of neoliberal, late capitalist agenda. And I feel sadness, I feel fear, I feel anger, and absurdity is sometimes the most rational reaction in the face of like profligate violence and money mongering.
Well, I mean, you're not wrong. In that sense, at least these are our opinions, folks, right? So, this is where I find myself aligning as well, in that I was saying earlier, you're going to see this film, you're going to think things, you're going to feel things, and it's okay to not always know what you're experiencing as well, right? Because I think that's a struggle for a lot of us.
Yeah, I think that I bring, in a normal film viewing experience as an audience member, a need. Just typically, I've been bred to want answers. I want events. I want things to make sense. And I came across an interview with a woman named Betty Reed, and she said, the thing that's more important than life are the quality of questions. Not answers, because answers change according to who you ask and what time you're in, but the quality of questions, the space that opens with a powerful question, is something that Betty thinks is more important than life. And I think that spoke to me, because in the film, I can't provide answers, and I'm not interested in feeding this sort of like addiction to chronological event-driven naturalism, where we kind of like want our emotional fix, and then we leave after an hour and a half, and then we go back to work because time is money.
Right.
There's something about the quality of questions that film, as this time space sculpture, can open up. And really that's the direction I wanted to go as a filmmaker with DADA.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think it's in a way that makes sense to me as well. And, I want to ask you, or explore maybe sort of the elements that you've used to also, I guess, get these reactions from us as audience members. So I noticed there's a lot of like soundscapes, and in the film, there's also music, to set tone. Can you talk a little bit about was that also something you thought about as you were planning the film, like you mentioned before?
Yeah, I mean, I knew, having done Oracle, that sound was at least as important as picture to me in the cinematography, and the choice of locked off frames and movement. And in the case of DADA, I really had to figure out what we discovered through the performance in the frames that I had designed before I could make final decisions about what the sound would be. But we had as much time in post-production creating sounds as we did editing the film.
Okay.
So it was about 4 months. And I definitely got my sound team to record a lot of elements of the spaces that we were shooting in. And then I worked with my designer, Brett Kaloran, to hone that and to discover new things. And we recorded other things we needed as they came up in post. But for me, a still image or a still frame with a peculiar off-camera noise can invite in the unknown in a way that is so special. We really can start to transform what we assume we're looking at as our ears are invited to participate more and more. Right. And so the relationship between these held, locked off frames and long bits of dialogue kind of like off camera as people move in is something that I did to activate the audience member, so that the still frame can alienate if it's held too long, but then it also, through your irritation, you cling to what you do have, which is something occurring in our auditory experience. So that's the relationship that I had a lot of fun exploring, and the kind of push pull between audience and characters, and how sound was an important element to that.
Okay, so that's really interesting because I can see it's how, as a person watching the film, I was trying to make sense of it one way, while at the same time, like you said, I'm hearing things, but then I'm also like experiencing the visual cues on screen. And it's like,
Yeah.
so what am I really paying attention to? And I think that's sort of an interesting way of exploring film as this other way of, experiencing art in a way. Um,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that's also what we notice in ourselves when we're experiencing a piece of art and it doesn't always make sense. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of, I've seen two live performances in the past week. They both elicited different emotions and I was conflicted in one. And in the other one, I was conflicted more because I wanted more of it, and it's just interesting how you react to things in real time versus, you're watching something on screen, you can come back to it. So for example, I tell people watch films more than once because you're going to come at it in a different way on second and third viewings. I don't know if any of that made sense to you.
It does. I think and I mean, we're lucky to have film as these moving objects that can still sit on our shelves or exist in the ether, that we like have this portal of an iPad or an Apple TV or something through, and we as we change in time, our relationship to these objects obviously shifts. And I think time and embodiment and duration were things that I was really playing with in this particular art object.
Okay. So you also made reference in your statement to Samuel Beckett, whom I really appreciate. And it also reminded me of his writings on Proust, because you talked about time just now. Did you have literary references as well when you were kind of working on this, or either pre or post or during production?
No, not directly. I mean, I understand that the things that I found fascinating in this project are things that other, much more capable giants have explored in the past. And I think that the elements of absurdity in reaction to kind of existential awe and dread are things that I first encountered when I read Beckett. And then as I read his novels, I really saw just how robust that sort of preoccupation was for him. And I mean, certainly our relationship to sentimentality, nostalgia, memory, obviously, what is it? The Proust's Memories of Time Past or something like that is something that I've encountered, but I wasn't directly referencing those things. But I think because we all sort of share this like biological experience, we'll tend to react similarly to like the big unanswered questions.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And there's also I think Beckett was always exploring about, why are we here and why now and what do we do with this now? Because it's not the same as been, yesterday or eons ago, right? So there's a lot of, like you said, sometimes angst, but also I think an invitation to be curious and kind of think things that way too, right? It's not always doom and gloom.
Yeah, there's the absurdity isn't necessarily violently manic. It can be like a denial of violence, such that we get I guess what the word is. It's funny. I'm embodying the emotion, but I can't have words. I mean, maybe that's the actor. I need a script, but it's there's a kind of like manic clownery that I can experience personally, and that I obviously see in Beckett. Some of his most famous works are overtly slapsticky, clowny, and I think some of the other stuff continue on the exploration of the roles that we play in life, and like trying on different roles to see, oh, if this one works, like, will she love me if I'm more like this? And I think like that really speaks to the desperation and the manic hope that can exist between in a parent to a child. And Jim's understanding of sort of deep grounded naturalism and how that can start to like vibrate like a sound wave into something more and more and more, such that like he's a buffoon and it's over the top by some people's expectations. But like I drove him in that direction to create a kind of like unspeakable hyper vigilance. And I mean, thus the name Dada. I think Dadaists were like incredibly vigilant people. They were uber aware of what was going on
Right.
in the world, such that the only rational thing would be to speak in consonants and vowels that did not form any language. You
Right.
know, so I think that like some parents will watch the desperation that builds in the film, and I definitely identify.
I think so because I mean I'm not a parent, but I do pick up on the dynamics of relationships, whether they're parental or and filial relationships, and just in general how there are extremes in all of the relationships that we have, right? And those extremes change from moment to moment, day to day. And I think that's part of, I'm assuming that's part of what we're experiencing in this film too. And I am curious in terms of what you think, a general public audience and an industry like film industry audience will get out of the film. I don't know if you've considered those things.
Yeah, my expectation is that it will confound a majority of my professional peers. And but I didn't do this for careerism. So much of what I have to do, press, everything like that, as it relates to acting, is about careerism. It's about climbing. It's about being seen and positioning yourself in certain ways. And really, the filmmaking, the writing, the directing is a cleansing for me. I still have to do those things to make money and make a living and hustle in Canada, because it's tricky. It's really hard to be an actor here.
Yeah.
But the film itself is bigger than me. It's separate from me. It actually had its own needs that I had to sit as though I was a parent and listen to in the later stages of the edit, and
Right.
just allow it to cut certain aspects of itself away. And like I know it sounds a little airy fairy to speak of it this way, but it truly was this almost supernatural experience of it being and becoming what it is. And I mean, the soundtrack that you mentioned is a great example. I worked with these composers, Phileas Blue, that created this lush wall-to-wall interpretation of the piece. And the film just didn't want it all. It took about a third of it. It ingested about a third of it. And that's what we participate in the final cut. And so I think that it isn't for everybody, and I don't care. I'm truly interested in the piece. It doesn't feel like it's mine. And those who have seen it and loved it are really like devoted to getting it to other people who they know will love it as well. And in fact, it's kind of doing like a little sneaky round on my private link to some pretty cool fellow artists right now. So I'm just excited to get it out on a shelf. We've got it a really interesting release through Game Theory in the fall. Nice. That will help just place it somewhere permanent so that those who are interested in work like this can reach for it. And I love talking to people who don't like it. I because I don't take any offense at all. There's no ego. The thing to me exists perfectly as it is. Right. But you don't have to like it. And there are some people who do, and that's super cool also.
Right. And I think that's kind of the whole point of me doing this too, because I don't always know who's going to like what I like versus who's going to hate what I like, or vice versa, right? So
Yeah.
really is up to an individual. I also think reviews can be that way too. They're very subjective. And I
Yeah.
talk about technical aspects of film as well, but I think it's the experience of it in the cinema that is what counts. So, but I think people should see it first on this Sunday because why wait till the fall? So, just want to remind folks that it's DADA screening Sunday, June 23rd, at the Future of Film Showcase at Paradise Theater in Toronto. You're going to do a Q&A, right, Aaron?
I am, yes. And there should be tickets at the door. I know it's a sold out screening, but I've heard that they often will release some at the door. So if you want to be sort of among those lucky folk to see it first in a great cinema. I love the Paradise. Great projection, great sound.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely hope that people make it out. Always, last minute tickets, always check out the day of. We're going to run out of time, but thank you so much, Aaron. Such a great discussion.
I really appreciate it, Heidi. Thank you.